is your relationship with time? Are you wired and tired, stressed and overwhelmed, busy and going nowhere? Or just want to scale your business? Welcome to Take Back Time with your host, Penny Zenker. Penny focuses on books, strategies, tools, and tips to help you work smarter and approach your time more strategically. As a result, you can have more energy, focus, and get more done in less time. Be more efficient and effective. Get ready to take back time.
Hello and welcome to Take Back Time. My name is Penny Zenker and I'm your host. And today I'm excited to be talking about leadership and the future of leadership. And I am with the great John Dame. And I love his slogan. It's making money and doing good. And I really like that. He has a reputation for insightful evaluation, planning, and a passion for driving results. And he's grown his involvement with companies and organizations internationally. So really help these companies to take it to the next level. He has a fine-tuned understanding of the risks, the challenges, and the opportunities that are facing both seasoned and emerging CEOs. And his current focus has turned towards the role of purpose. He has a great newsletter and series around that. And you should definitely sign up and get on that newsletter. And so purpose around the business environment and the new challenge of transitioning to a millennial-based workforce and growing leadership teams within his client companies. So without further ado, welcome, John.
Thanks, Penny. Glad to be here with you.
We've met a couple years ago, and I really have a great respect with the companies that you work with, the realness of what you get into with them around leadership. So how did you get so passionate about working with leaders in this way?
Historically, believe it or not, I grew up in the broadcasting business, owned and operated radio stations for many years, most of my career, and then started a network syndicating talk shows nationally. But for the past 15 years, I've been working almost exclusively with CEOs. And what I've seen is that people are generally good, CEOs included, even though there's a bad rap right now in terms of how people view, let's say, leaders in general, because we don't have tremendous amount of great role models to look at. Fortunately, at the top of the news, we have political leaders that are not the greatest models, as well as even some of our higher level industry leaders who have been arrested or have a variety of things that have happened. And so the concept that I talk to people about is that the leadership has to change, view our jobs differently, and treat the human beings that we work with quite a bit differently. So that's kind of the premise that I've worked with. And in doing that, what I found is that the people that I work with, whether they're the most senior leaders in an organization or kind of emerging leaders, are looking for a way to be heard, a way to communicate in a fashion that treats them as intelligent human beings that they are, and also gives them a place to be safe. We don't think about that too much, but even for executives, where can you go to talk about the stuff that's really important? Because sometimes you can't go home. Right. Sometimes you don't want to share that with your family or even with your best friends. And so what I try to do in the environments that I work with is create a place where we can talk about what's really important to people in an atmosphere where they're not afraid to be vulnerable and maybe expose a few of those warts they think they have.
Right. I read a study that Google had done where they were really taking apart what makes great teams. And it took them like 4 years or something like that, looking at all different constellations of teams. And the interesting thing, you just mentioned the word safety. And that was one of the key things that came out, was that they needed to be an environment that they felt safe and respected. So that's an interesting word, safety.
Yeah. If we think about leaders in the world that I grew up in, it was pretty much of a command and control world. And it worked pretty well at the time because there were really more people than there were jobs. In other words, when I was growing up in the business world, people stuck around and took a lot of crap from their leaders because they had to. There were not that many opportunities. And today, when you look at people, and we all think it's terrible, I actually think it's a pretty good thing, but that people are unwilling to kind of be in an environment where it is not safe, where they don't feel, and this goes more than just whatever you might say with the Me Too organization, but people like to be in a place where they have friends, where they feel like there's a little more meaning to their work than just showing up and making a buck. I mean, nobody wants to go to work, I don't think, any day so their boss can drive a BMW. There just isn't, it's not the case. And so I think that people are looking to find an environment that allows them to come to work every day, feel like they're making a difference. Humans are herd animals. We like to be around other humans for the most part. And you want to be at a place where that is pleasant to do and not in a place where it's unpleasant to do. And sometimes we mistake kind of business toughness for, and that can get you results. I mean, there are all different ways to get results, but business toughness can be mistaken for having a good, and those results for having a great organization. I think that people are looking for safe and kind of collaborative environments. They want a boss that has a steady hand on the tiller, somebody who doesn't change every day. You don't want to come in with a different kind of direction every day. It drives people crazy when they do that. They want to have some say and some input into what's going on, and they'd like a boss that has compassion, as much as that's not, all these are not the terms that most leaders, people want to have vision and they want to have a strategy and they'd like to have goals and focus and all those kind of things. And I think employees are looking for something slightly different.
Well, yeah, skills and strategy are not enough as a leader, right?
That's right.
Empathy and compassion and authenticity and all of that, like you said, are the soft factors, but they're even more important today, as you said, because, and I want to go back to the word that you said, less tolerance. I think we do have in the millennials, or at least this is my perception, experience that I've seen, I'm interested in your opinion on that, is that there is a lot less tolerance for any type of, they know what they want. They want to have more of a say. They want to share and be more connected and purposeful and collaborative. And they have very little tolerance for, if this environment doesn't have it, I'm going somewhere else.
Yeah, I think it is part of the millennial culture. And unlike, let's say, a boomer or some Gen X who might be slightly different, millennials have had an environment where there have been pretty good job opportunities, and especially now where there are more jobs than there are people. So they can choose to go and leave without another opportunity. I think that there's a real flexibility and a freedom to do that. And I think it's probably more in the culture of a millennial to want to work to live so that they can actually enjoy their lives and get away and do things. But the other fact is that millennials work more than anybody else does because they spend more time online. They work from home more than anybody else. And I just think it's a little different way that they want to work. They'd certainly like to have a flexible work environment. But I think this kind of tolerance is for everybody. Nobody would like to go work for a jerk. And I think that in the end, most people, whether they're 65 years old or 25, have a real aversion to somebody who is not a truth teller, who is that looks at people as horses that you can drive with a carrot and a stick. Mm-hmm. And so that I think when we look at people in that manner, we lose the ability to optimize a relationship, which would then optimize the efficiency and the work habits of the organization. So,
right.
And I think if this were easy to fix, Penny, people would be doing it right and left. But I think so often people don't know as leaders, they think it's, let's have a Friday happy hour and beanbag chairs around the office.
And that's enough, right?
And that's enough, yeah.
Right. Well, I bring up that tolerance because I don't mean it actually as a negative, but as a positive in the context of it's forcing changes. And I think it forces and opens the eyes and empowers. Like you said, nobody wants to work for a jerk, an organization that doesn't have integrity. And so I think it's freed even baby boomers and other generations to look at it and be like, yeah, we don't want to work under those conditions either. And I think it is raising the bar for leaders to show up really as leaders and not as that command and control, like you said, but to really stretch and improve their leadership. And I think it's a really good thing.
Yeah, me too. What I do believe is that, and you talked about the soft skills, a lot of times we place so much emphasis on kind of the technical aspects of business. That might be all of the things like Six Sigma, lean, kind of understanding budgeting and strategy and those components. And what we have seen, at least the observation that I would have, and Gallup supports it, is in the past 40 years, there's been little or no movement in the level of engagement. And, level of engagement is people willing to go above and beyond the call of duty emotionally for an organization, kind of really into it. And that hasn't changed in that level of engagement, depending on the organization. But overall, the average has been about 30% of the people are engaged, which means that 70% of people are somewhat disengaged. And you might dispute that if you have an organization. But the truth is that for a lot of people, it's a job. Then there's nothing wrong with it being a job. The issue is that I think that work is not meaningful to people, and therefore they end up not being as attentive, as positive as they could be about it, and therefore they don't get as much done as they could. I mean, the data shows that a person who's engaged does about 1.5 times the amount of work that somebody who's disengaged, and doesn't cost any more other than paying attention. And it's kind of what I would call some sort of total culture ecosystem that you need to think about to make that happen.
Distractions are the enemy of productivity. Go to distractionquiz.com and find out your distraction profile. Are you a time zombie or a hamster? Take this free distraction quiz today to rate your ability to focus on what keeps you from being a wizard. Go to distractionquiz.com.
So what are the key things for leaders who are looking to positively engage their people and create more meaning in the workplace? What are some strategies that they can put in place that you've seen successful?
These are not revelations. You're not going to go, oh my gosh, this is earth-shattering. But I do think number one is that if you kind of start out as a leader and kind of know yourself, kind of understand who you are, why it is you're doing the work that you're doing, what your values are, so that you can translate those values into alignment with your organization. If you don't run it, if you're not the CEO, you might be really interested in whether what you value aligns with what the organization values and what the purpose is for the organization, or what you collectively see is that purpose. And I think that starts out by looking at yourself and gaining some kind of self-awareness that you would need to kind of move forward as a leader. Because so often we kind of look, this is not like 7 steps. It's more of developing a way of being as a leader than just 7 steps to be a leader. And I think it starts with kind of defining your purpose, understanding yourself a little bit better. Then I think if you look at the culture that you want to engender in your organization, I think that that's where you can look at the organizational purpose and say, boy, does that align with my purpose? And how does that work for the people that work here? Why do they show up for work every day? What would give them greater meaning? I don't think this simply has to be, we're going to change the world together. It could just mean we want to work hard and have friends at work. I mean, there are things that are purposeful that are there. I also think that leaders looking at themselves in a culture as a coach versus a manager is a big difference. In other words,
absolutely.
If you're an athlete, you have a coach. That coach can't replace you in the athletic endeavor, but what they can do is add some points to help you get better, but you've got to do it on your own. And I think that people appreciate coaching and feedback loops that are both positive and reaffirming. It's a funny thing when I've done strategic planning in an organization and I talk to people about how do they know when they're doing a good job? You know what they tell me?
What?
It's the absence of being yelled at.
Oh, well, that's really positive.
It's really positive. And you laugh at that. So often when I work with leaders, and for many good reasons, they're very fearful of offering either too much positive or too much negative feedback. They don't want to lose anybody. They don't want to build them up too much. And they don't treat people like the adults that they are. And therefore, I believe they're missing a key component in the way that they can develop a culture where people want to come to work every day. So I think it's kind of also being very clear about your values as in the culture and around those values, because sometimes values seem a little abstract to employees. I mean, can you name the 7 values? And I think that there are behaviors that you have to kind of identify that are those behaviors that would have the greatest and most positive impact on the organization that you want to reinforce and make those part of the overall culture too, and kind of codify those so that you end up with a way to look at it. So
I want to highlight what you said, going back a minute, and then we'll come back to the behaviors. But around a key strategy is just to ask more quality questions, to be that coach. Because I don't know if you've read Daniel Pink's book, Drive.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Great book, right? And he talks about autonomy, right? And when people feel like they're being told what to do versus giving them the flexibility and freedom within a question to be able to bring their creativity and their ideas and find the answer out themselves, giving them a piece of autonomy that engages people.
Yeah. Well, so often today that autonomy is taken away by people who want to do a good job and feel compelled to be the micromanagers that are there. And it's not that they want to micromanage people. They're so worried about the outcome.
Right.
And
it's fear-based,
it ends
right?
up feeling like a lack of trust, that you don't trust me to do the work. And there's sometimes a lot of good ways to get something done. And if we don't allow people to kind of grow and learn on their own, they're not going to do it. And Daniel Pink's study kind of validates that, because in addition to that autonomy, that don't micromanage me, he's also talking about mastery there, where people want to get better at what they do.
Totally.
And the only way to get better is to give people increasingly more complex tasks to do over an extended period of time without oversight, to see where the edges of their capability are. And if you can do that, that's pretty good. And then the other thing that he talks about, if you remember, is purpose.
Yes.
Like people connect with that. And that was all ages. That wasn't
right.
just young. So those 3 components are kind of what motivates people. And certainly there are iterations of that. But I think what you brought up about Daniel Pink is great, very valid in the workplace today.
Yeah, and I just want to piggyback off what you said about the micromanager. The thing is, we don't know we're doing it. I'm a recovering micromanager. I used to fall into that trap. And it made me more stressed out and gave me more to do. And I know that it comes back to the first thing that you talked about, which was self-awareness, is to really ask yourself, are you really coaching or are you micromanaging? So I think getting a feel of that and being able to delegate to really allow that autonomy is a really big feedback point for leaders to see where they are right now and where their potential is for improvement.
The hardest thing about this too, if you think of a leader and even kind of understanding being more self-aware, there are very few places where a leader can go and get kind of unfiltered with the best intent feedback. In other words, it's one thing to be very candid. It's another thing for you to be candid with somebody with the right heart. And what you want to do is, the goal is to help people get better and kind of grow and learn from the circumstance. And there are very few environments where CEOs, owners of companies, can go, because people blow smoke up their behind so much that work for them that they don't get that. So they have to go other places, whether it's into peer group like what I do with Vistage, or any other kind of peer group that allows them to kind of be more vulnerable and open to hearing about behaviors that they have that may or may not be helping them become leaders. There's this CEO briefing, which is part of the magazine, had this question that came up, and it said, what's the one behavior that your employees think that if you changed it would have the greatest impact on the organization? And so often CEOs never get that. they never get to hear that because people are unwilling to be candid with them because they think they may lose their job. They think the person may want to hear it. And there's a bias, the sunflower bias, where a CEO is talking to a group and says, here's an idea I'd like you to think about. But I want you to tell me everything you think is wrong with this idea. And after 20 minutes, the CEO goes, see, I told you this is really a great idea. And everybody's afraid to tell them. There's a whole big organizational design video that came out in the 70s about that called the Abilene Paradox, and looks at why we are afraid to respond when something happens that is difficult for us to counter. So there are all sorts of things, whether it's people left at the altar that we're afraid to say, I don't want to really get married, and they go all the way to the altar and then they say, I can't do it. Or a boss that is trying to push something and they think they're asking for unfiltered feedback and they're just getting whatever you do, whatever you want to do. Feeling. It's interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. Well, in the context of the time frame that we have today, what would be one last thing that is either on your heart that you see the most that you want to bring to people's attention, or a final tip that you'd like to give the audience around leading in this new world?
Yeah, it's just a free offer. I put this concept, which is called the Lead with Purpose Leaders Pledge, and it's 10 items. But what it does is it kind of sets the tone for maybe who you might like to be, or looking at things that you might like to change, or the paradigm that shifts. An example of this would be, in the past 40 years, we've looked at and paid executives in the event of a downturn in the business economy. The first thing that they do is they do cutbacks in people. So no wonder people aren't really too loyal to companies, because the first thing that happens in a cutback. But what if we looked at things a little bit differently and said, hey, the first thing we're going to do is everything but people? Because there's no CEO that tells me that his people aren't his greatest asset, his or her greatest asset. I think that what you need to do is to say, well, how do we shift the paradigm to really live that, so that we're not just giving that lip service? And how do then people get to know? Because if you were working at an organization, you knew there was a downturn, and the executives in charge did everything that they could, including reduce their salaries, took away their vacations, gave money to you to be able to stay. What would you think about that as an organization where you'd like to work and continue? Because circumstances change over time and organizations go through bad moments and good moments. So,
That being said, I have heard people tell their stories about how they did that in difficult times, smaller organizations. They said they have employees for life.
For life, yeah. And that's what I think you would find. And so if you want to talk about changing the way you lead and the perception, because we've all been kind of conditioned. I mean, when you think of the biggest companies, whatever it might happen to be, they fire 5,000 people, and I'm sure the CEO doesn't want to do that. On the other hand, that's the way they get the money to continue to operate. And so I think if there was another way to do it, they made the mistake of hiring the people. They ought to own it a little bit more.
Yeah, I like that. It's kind of like run your big business like a small business. Because, when I had my own IT business, my people got paid before I got paid.
Yeah.
I think it's just you have a different level of, I know that big companies, they appreciate their people too, and they'll tell you that people are the biggest assets, but not in the same way, right? Not giving up, like you said, and seeing what they can sacrifice. And I think that's interesting. So big businesses should run their business and be a leader like as if it were a small business. Yeah.
And with the right heart. Go back to that, because I think that ultimately, if you really believe in those human beings that you have working for and with you as being great and wanting to do a good job, then you approach them differently than you would as people that are lined up, and you can change them on a moment's notice and there's always somebody better waiting in line. That may or may not be true. I don't believe that's true. I think that you have to find good people, treat them right, grow them up, help them become even more valuable assets for your company. And does it always pay off exactly right? No, but I think more often it will. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for that. That's a good mindset thought for leaders to be thinking at a high level. What sacrifices are they willing to make, as you said, with the right heart in before people are being considered to be let go. So that's interesting under difficult times.
Yep.
So great. So John, how can people get a hold of you and get onto also your newsletter and things like that and get that pledge that you were talking about?
Right. If you'd like to pick up the pledge, it's free. You don't have to sign up for anything. I don't take your name. Just go to johndame.com, JOHNDAME.com, and you can download that. I have a Lead with Purpose Friday digest that you can get, which are a series of videos or thoughts about being a purposeful leader. And that comes out every Friday. And once again, all I need is an email address. I don't do anything with it other than send you that digest.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing your years of experience. I appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Penny. I'm glad to do it.
And thank you all for being here and taking away a few nuggets on how you can be a better leader to create better performance and productivity for yourself as well as for your team. So my name is Penny Zanker, and this is Take Back Time. We'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you for listening. Today's topic is another opportunity for you to put the knowledge you learned into practice. Tune in again next week for more strategies that will help you have more energy and focus to get more done in less time, so you can continue to take back time.